Welcome, everyone, to today's Pineapple Support webinar on imposter syndrome. Are you a fraud or is it your thoughts? Feel like a fraud. Just because you think it does not make it true. Competitive industries like adult entertainment appear to have a higher percentage of individuals who have experienced imposter syndrome to some degree. This webinar will explore characteristics of imposter syndrome, how individual identities play a role, consequences, and how to overcome it. Today's webinar is presented by myself, Dr. Tess Kilwein, and sponsored by XLoveCam. Do you ever find yourself thinking, I'm a fake, I don't deserve to be here, or I'm not smart enough to be here? Then you've probably experienced imposter syndrome and you are in the right place. Before getting too far, I want to note that some have questioned whether the term syndrome is actually appropriate. Given that imposter syndrome is such a naturally occurring phenomenon, it's more common among those with historically marginalized identities and not an illness. I'll continue to refer to imposter syndrome throughout the training, though emphasize that the audience should refer to the term or experience that resonates most with you. The term was first identified among professional businesswomen who, despite success and praise in their industry, continue to believe that their achievements were due to sheer luck and that they had fooled everyone around them. However, it has now been extended more broadly, including to men, but particularly to individuals who hold historically marginalized identities related to gender, sexuality, race, socioeconomic status, or even career choice. Imposter syndrome is broadly defined as general feelings of inadequacy in professional situations and often feels and looks like judging oneself in the workplace. You may experience repeated feelings or thoughts that you are incompetent or not good enough. And these thoughts happen despite evidence to the contrary or lack of evidence that one cannot succeed. Lastly, these thoughts are often informed by someone's personal history and tend to play out in occupational, educational, or other high-pressure settings. While most definitions are still restricted to workplace settings, imposter syndrome has been observed outside of the workplace, such as family expectations, one's identity, and general perfectionism. Essentially anywhere that we hold expectations for ourselves. I know a lot of people are visual learners, so I want to share this image of the imposter syndrome cycle, courtesy of Brenda Terry, a mindset and business mentor. So if we start, we see that people overwork or overfunction to compensate for a fear of being discovered as a fraud. So on the top, we see we take on a new project or task. And then we move to the next, anxiety, worry, over preparation or procrastination. And then the individual completes the project and might briefly feel relief. Like these efforts lead to success and that person temporarily feels better. And then they rationalize success as luck, reject positive feedback or praise. They may respond negatively to that positive feedback, completely dismiss it, and quickly feel like a fraud again by experiencing self-doubt, depression, or anxiety. And then these individuals feel compelled to overwork and start that cycle anew by taking on new projects or tasks, and the cycle continues. So some other characteristics of imposter syndrome is that it's not necessarily visible, both to others and even within ourselves. So we can't pick one person out of the workplace and say, yes, this person experiences imposter syndrome. We really can't predict who it applies to, and a level of success in an industry also can't help predict it. So even those with the most celebrated careers are susceptible to imposter syndrome. And these individuals might actually be the best at masking it when it's happening. Folks who experience imposter syndrome can feel like they don't belong in the room or they don't deserve the opportunities that are being presented to them. Another common characteristic is pervasive fear of failure that might prevent one from seeking opportunities or taking risks at all. So individuals might turn down opportunities that they're actually qualified for or could advance their career out of fear that they would fail. The need to distinguish oneself or be special can cause undue pressure on oneself or risk interpersonal relationships. So what we find among individuals with imposter syndrome is these consequences might not just apply to the workplace, but outside as well, especially in relationships. And the deep-seated denial of ability, despite lack of evidence to support it, maybe the person has never even tried, right? So often this deep-seated fear or denial that one can accomplish this task, there's really no evidence to the contrary. And finally, common characteristic is the fear or guilt of achieving success that can have numerous complex explanations, often informed by our personal history. Now that we've talked about some common characteristics of imposter syndrome, here are some consequences. So why do we care? Why is it important that people experience imposter syndrome? And these are the reasons why. This is how it impacts people. So imposter syndrome can result in high levels of perfectionism, become maladaptive, and interfere with professional and personal tasks over time. So a certain level of perfectionism might be helpful for folks, but once it becomes maladaptive and this like win at all costs, succeed at all costs, it starts to interfere with professional and personal relationships. This can ultimately result in really overbearing professional lives that increases stress and lack of fulfillment, but it's never good enough, right? All of our time or energy is spent in that professional space, but it's never enough to make us feel fulfilled. As a result, job dissatisfaction and burnout are really common among those who experience imposter syndrome. Importantly, imposter syndrome can also impact psychological well-being because it can help us, reduces self-esteem, increases rates of both depression and anxiety. So these psychological consequences are really important. And if left unaddressed, imposter syndrome can really keep people from enjoying their successes at all or living life to its full potential. Some behavioral consequences that can result from imposter syndrome can be detrimental to relationships and interfere with the ability to connect to others, including, dismissing compliments from those in the workplace or those in our personal lives, minimizing when we get those kind of compliments from others, always attributing our success to something else can, really impact our ability to connect with others in a professional space. Imposter syndrome can become particularly detrimental when combined with cultural biases and stereotypes. So for example, internalizing the belief that as a woman of color, you don't deserve that opportunity or role despite your qualifications. So we see heightened levels of imposter syndrome among those who hold identities that have historically been marginalized. While there's no single cause of imposter syndrome, as previously mentioned, one's personal history often plays a role. While culture and environment both play a role, family dynamics and the roles people learn early in life really can be contributors to imposter syndrome later on in life. For example, when it's communicated that your worth is tied to what you know and how much you succeed, this can result in those high levels of perfectionism that turn maladaptive over time. Imposter syndrome can also result from growing up in a household really high in comparison. So let's say there's a sibling or another close relative that's really deemed to be the smart one, the successful one. People can grow up to feel driven to prove that they're smart and successful too, yet never feel validated by their family despite feedback from others. On the other hand, families that are really high in praise, they give a lot of praise to their children for maybe every ability, they may raise children that go out into the real world and realize that they may not be good at everything. They may start to question the messages they receive from their families about every aspect of their life. And ultimately, imposter syndrome behaviors are not caused by one particular thing. They have long roots and are often family and community driven and can be reinforced in workplace or personal settings over time. Now, those of you who have attended one of my webinars before, I always like to include a slide that's really specific to the adult entertainment industry. So we know that imposter syndrome is really common in workplace, but it can also permeate every part of an adult entertainer's life and career. Occupationally, it can show up when auditioning for new roles, pursuing opportunities in networking, and taking on exciting new roles or projects. Performers may not be able to fully embrace or be fulfilled by these career opportunities because there's this lingering question of, do I deserve to be here? Have I really earned this? Do people really want to see what I have to offer? In more extreme situations, it can create deep feelings of inadequacy or fraudulence in professional situations. Some performers might decide not to pursue opportunities at all or actively sabotage themselves when they do gain access. Personally, it can make us question whether we're suitable lovers of deserving of love and respect in our personal lives because of the career paths that we've chosen. Now, one might ask, why are adult performers at increased risk for imposter syndrome? So there's some risk factors unique to the lifestyle of an adult entertaining performer that might put one at elevated risk. One is rapid, sometimes life-changing events and opportunities that are unpredictable. So adult entertainment performers might tell themselves, we're so lucky for the opportunity, rather than recognizing the work, often grueling, to put you in the position to get that opportunity. Most of you have worked, hustled, and picked yourself up along the way, so you deserve everything coming your way. Supply and demand in this industry can also often be chaotic and unpredictable. So performers may tend to place blame on themselves or their abilities rather than recognize it as a naturally occurring phenomenon in the industry. So let's say during a time of year where things tend to be slower, may place blame on ourselves. Didn't work hard enough this year, didn't put myself out there enough, right? When it's just a naturally occurring phenomenon that this industry is really unpredictable. And the last risk factor is the adult industry culture. So what we know is this industry can fetishize overworking, immediacy, and pushing oneself to their absolute limits. Pushing back on this culture can be scary and pose real risk for loss of opportunities and relationships. But what we know is when we set boundaries and sometimes lose opportunities as a result, we might respond by telling ourselves we don't deserve them or want them enough. When in reality, setting some of these boundaries and prioritizing relationships that understand the need for boundaries and space makes us more productive when we do take on opportunities, makes our life more fulfilling both in the industry and in our personal lives. Okay, so a little bit more on responding or recognizing and responding to imposter syndrome. So for each of you, I want to think of your current life, your current workplace, your current personal lives, and try and take note of, could this be going on for you and how you might respond appropriately? So imposter syndrome often manifests when we find ourselves pushing back against unsustainable work practices. So if you're finding yourself needing to set boundaries or say no, or someone else doesn't or says yes, that's when we know imposter syndrome might be going on. Take time to periodically check in with yourself and be honest about your actions and motives. Ask yourself, are you doing the work because you enjoy it and it's professionally or personally meaningful to you, because you feel pressured or afraid of losing opportunities as a result? We should also really prioritize taking the time to care for ourselves between and during opportunities. It'll make those opportunities more personally fulfilling and ultimately successful. Similarly, and I know this is a tough one, but learning to slow down and go at your own pace, even when faced with external pressures to proceed when you aren't comfortable or ready, better products take time. And finally, as difficult as it can be, being willing to stop or say no to an opportunity that isn't good for your health and well-being. Ask yourself, what are the consequences of proceeding or saying yes for stopping and saying no, and what that might give back to you in terms of your time or energy? Thinking long-term and in sustainable ways can help us make those decisions in the moment. And again, because some of us are visual learners, we've discussed recognizing and responding to imposter syndrome more often in the adult industry. But here's some general tips to break the imposter syndrome cycle, courtesy of Business Foundations. First, Self-awareness is key. So when you start to feel negative thoughts surrounding your work, take a moment to be aware of them and consider if they're a true reflection of reality or you're just your imposter syndrome getting to you. 2, change and challenge our internal dialogue. So practice positive affirmations and try to speak kindly to yourself. Recognize that you do deserve the opportunities that are in front of you and that your success is really due to the work that you've put in. 3, take it one step at a time. So tackle those projects on a task-by-task basis so that you can celebrate the small wins on your way. A lot of people don't consider themselves to have completed a project or be successful until it's fully done and out there, right? But what does it mean to break that into smaller components, to, create some content and organize that content so you're prepared to put it out into the world, respond to one message, respond to, one email, one opportunity to connect, things like that. Taking these into smaller chunks and recognizing and celebrating the small wins along the way can help us feel like less of a fraud. And on that note, celebrate your wins. Make sure you take the time to acknowledge your achievements and celebrate them along the way. And lastly, get some perspective. So often we can be our own worst critics. So helping you gain perspective, you might choose to share your goals, thoughts, and feelings with someone you trust. Maybe a mentor, maybe someone else in the industry who's experienced something similar, or maybe someone in your personal life who can help remind you, hey, they see you grinding, they see you working, they see you, putting in the effort that you really deserve the success that you've seen. Okay. So in recognition that not all tools work for everyone, I want to provide some additional tools for imposter syndrome, more specific to adult performers that you can start using as soon as today. This list is adapted from Alexander Lee Recker's Imposter Syndrome for Actors, written for Actors Health. Number 1, write an objective list of your achievements. How many of us have never done something like that? Name the things you're worried about, that you might deceive others about, and then provide a list of reasons that you're competent in achieving those things. You already have achieved those things in other ways. So journaling, writing some kind of list, reflecting on, hey, these are the thoughts that I'm having, and this is the evidence against that I actually do deserve this success. This is the work that I put in, can be a helpful reminder to us. It's important to look for solid, objective evidence, which is almost always there. Focus on what makes you competent rather than what makes you incompetent. Next, and more broad, take a moment to ask yourself what success actually means. Look at your definition and modify it if needed. So is it based solely on productivity, output, views, etc.? Does it have nothing to do with feeling professionally fulfilled and making meaningful content for customers or the world? Make sure that success is defined by you instead of all the external messages you've received about it. When you feel imposter syndrome creeping in, break that cycle that we talked about by responding to these thoughts. This can be done internally, or if you need extra support, speak to somebody or write down the thoughts in a journal. Once they're out of your head, they're less likely to build up over time, and you'll be better equipped to respond in the moment. As difficult as this one may be, resist comparing yourself to other performers and content creators. We talked previously about sometimes the root of imposter syndrome is a history of comparison in your personal life. This is really common in our industry as well. So others in the industry have entirely different lived experiences from you, and your definition of success and fulfillment can only be individually determined. The best person to compare yourself is you. And how often during particularly busy seasons do you find yourself not doing the things to take care of you and be kind to yourself? Have a system in place for those moments and times of the year. A self-care basket that you can pull out in those moments. Spending time with a loved one or showing yourself compassion. Make sure we prioritize this kind of care. And lastly, but arguably most importantly, reach out to your creative community. You certainly are not alone in your experience, and having a practical reminder of that can be helpful. If you've struggled to find your own community, tap into one of Pineapple's support groups for this purpose. There's a number of support groups that you can just drop into each month with other performers who I assure you are experiencing some of the same thoughts as you are. Before we conclude today's webinar, I would like to offer a guided meditation on overcoming imposter syndrome by Justin Michael Williams. Imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is that feeling that you have inside of not being enough. And it's what holds so many of us back sometimes. So if you've ever struggled with not feeling good enough, if you've ever struggled with imposter syndrome, this practice will help. So I'd like you to start by taking a deep breath in and a deep breath out. And if you feel comfortable closing your eyes, do that now. Take another deep breath in and out. Now with me to the count of 4, inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Now exhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Now inhale again 1, 2, 3, 4. And exhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Inhale one last time. 2, 3, 4. Now exhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Now breathe normally and place your hands face up, just right on your legs, your palms face up. In your right hand, imagine that you're holding the parts of yourself that thinks you can go after your dreams, even if it's just a small part of you. That you're holding that in your right hand. And in your left hand, imagine the version of yourself that thinks that you're an imposter, that doesn't believe in you, that thinks that you can't. And so the right hand believes that you can do it, even if it's small. And the left hand believes that you can't. Hold both of these for a moment. And now, step back and realize that you are neither of these parts, that you are the one holding them. Realize that both of these stories you are holding, but who you are is the one that even realizes these stories are happening. And so I want you now to flick your fingers and just wiggle them and let these two stories dissolve. Flick them away. Let these stories, both stories, dissolve. You, the real you, is the one holding the stories. And now place your palms face down on your legs and sit tall in your power. And I want you to start repeating these words in your mind or out loud again and again. Here are your words. I am enough. 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 Keep going. I am enough. 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 Keep it going. But now place your hands over your heart, one on top of the other, right over the center of your chest, and continue telling yourself, I am enough. I am enough. I am enough. I am enough. Now go ahead and take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. Again, a deep breath in and out. You are enough. And when you're ready, I invite you to open your eyes. The key is recognizing that you are not either of these stories. You're none of your stories. None of them define you. You, instead, are the one that is holding these stories. So now it's time to hold a new story that you are enough. You are enough. You are enough. You are enough. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Tess Kilwein, during today's Pineapple Support webinar on imposter syndrome. Are you a fraud or is it your thoughts? Feel like a fraud? Just because you think it does not make it true. Competitive industries like adult entertainment appear to have a higher percentage of individuals who've experienced imposter syndrome. This webinar explored characteristics of imposter syndrome, how individual identities play a role, consequences, and how to overcome it. Today's webinar was sponsored by X Love Camp. Thank you for joining me today.